So today, as we're talking about collaborative planning, how should companies do this planning in a way to get it right?
It's been a lot of wrangling of data, a lot of wrangling of humans as well. And 51% of people find it difficult to engage senior executives to buy into the process, which is a roadblock. And 57% of organizations struggle cross-functionally.
Understanding that it's about communication and relationships and making sure that you have buy-in and people understand what they're doing.
Without people, we don't have anything. There's a lot of talk about AI taking our jobs. We're a ways from that just yet. How do I report my profit and loss? How do we make it one button click? Can we make it one button click? Often you can't, but you're thinking about making it really, really easy for those executives to get access to their data.
Hello, and welcome to the Don't Panic, It's Just Data podcast, where we have a weekly conversation with people impacting the enterprise tech landscape. My name is Debbie Reynolds, and I will be your host today. So, in this episode, we'll be speaking to Warwick Leitch, who's the Product Management Director at insightsoftware. So today we're going to be tackling crucial elements of financial strategy, collaborative planning, and we'll unpack how to build effective teams for budgeting success, exploring strategies to foster genuine participation, ensuring that budget outcomes are both accurate and inclusive. So all of that while keeping pace with the rapid and evolving financial environment. So Warwick, why don't you tell us a bit about yourself and your background? Happy to have you here today.
Yeah, Debbie, great to be here. Thank you so much. I have been an implementation person, is probably the best way to express it. I've worked with budgeting and forecasting teams and financial reporting teams for over 25 years, a variety of different industries and companies, helping them implement budgeting, helping them implement forecasting, and inevitably that financial reporting. So it's been a lot of wrangling of data, a lot of wrangling of humans as well, which I think is a big theme for today, and trying to bring that data and that information together in a form that's going to help drive companies forwards.
I love that. Data wrangler.
Chief data wrangler.
Yeah. So today, as we're talking about collaborative planning, how should companies do this planning in a way to get it right? So we know that it's more crucial than ever for companies to have more accurate financial data in their planning. And we know that a lot of the technology is enabling them to do that in real time or near real time ways. But how do people get that right?
Yeah, it's a good question. There's a lot of bad ways to do it, even with the right systems, and obviously some good ways. There was a survey I saw recently, 44% of enterprise performance management, which is what we're talking about, budgeting and planning and reporting systems. Those implementations have had major barriers to success. 44% of them have struggled to get over the line, if they got over the line at all. That means there's some failure in those percentages. And 51% of people find it difficult to engage senior executives to buy into the process, which is a roadblock. And 57% of organizations struggle cross-functionally. So you might have the office of the CFO putting the budget together. Sometimes it's in Excel. Hopefully it's in a better tool than that these days. But then getting sales and IT and other departments to actually contribute to the plan can be quite difficult. I've always had three primary ways to ensure that projects like these are successful. And projects like these are having data in the right people's hands at the right time. So number one is executive level buy-in. And that was born out of one of those percentages. You need the CEO, CFO, and anyone else with C in their title, and anyone else close to those people bought in and driving as best they can. Obviously, they're not going to be hands-on necessarily, but there needs to be an expectation from them that we are doing this as an organization. There needs to be a clear vision of what we're delivering and why we're doing it. And I've got a couple of great examples I'll share here as well. And then there's the third piece is thoughtful execution. Now, you'd think that execution is where it's all at. I buy a new system maybe, I've got data here, here, and here, I've got to bring it together. And then I've got to somehow work out how to do a budget with this data. That does land in execution, but without the first two, the execution piece is a bit of a waste of time. So that's a high level view of how we get there.
First of all, I love the fact that you were talking about, the people part of it, understanding that it's about communication and relationships and making sure that you have buy-in and people understand what they're doing. But yeah, definitely elaborate.
Without people, we don't have anything. There's a lot of talk about AI taking our jobs. We're a ways from that just yet. But I'll share an example of a hospitality company where these 3 points, the executive-led execution of the project, of the initiative, the clear vision from the executives, and the thoughtful execution really, this example personifies those three. So it was a hospitality organization with several very, very large hotels. And within those hotels, they have rooms for rent. They have restaurants and bars and conference facilities, your classic large multi-story, multi-level hotel. Think of it like that. And they recently came into some money from some private equity. And that private equity company, a lot of people know this, have 3 to 5 year goals. And those goals are often lofty. And for this organization, they had some very lofty goals to meet within a 3-year time frame. And one of the problems they had, which was interesting, is they had an older style ERP. They actually had a number of different accounting systems through their different hotels and at HQ. And this project, this planning project, started out as an ERP project. And the executives sat back and said, is this really our problem? Because what we want to see is where we're headed, not where we've come from. So think of it when you're driving your car, you've got a big windscreen and a little rear view mirror. You got a little rear view mirror because it's less important about where you came from versus where you're going to. And that was really important to them. They wanted to see the future. So the CEO and CFO ran this project. It was very, very important for them to have visibility of what's coming. Why is that so important in hospitality? It's really volatile. Storms can make a huge difference to your revenue. Earthquakes, economic downturns, economic upturns, conferences, all of those sorts of things make a huge difference to the bottom line for these organizations. So this organization had an executive level buy-in and drive, and that made a huge difference. I've worked in projects where we haven't had that, and it hasn't necessarily failed, but hasn't been as successful as this company. This company saw 20+% growth year on year, which is pretty amazing in any industry. And it was driven by this process, by this initiative. So next is the vision. What was the vision? One button click. That was literally the catchphrase that they had. We want one button click to see my data. One button click to plan. One button click to reforecast. One button click to know where we're going to be, where we think we're going to be in 18 months or 12 months or 2 months or 1 month or next week because there's a storm rolling in. So that was really important. And then one button click I heard in every single meeting I was in. Anytime we were thinking about a particular process, for instance, how do I report my profit and loss? How do we make it one button click? Can we make it one button click? Often you can't, but you're thinking about making it really, really easy for those executives to get access to their data. That translated into a really easy process and method for the line managers, the people who are contributing to the forecast and reviewing their actuals, albeit pretty quickly as well. So that translated beautifully into the execution process as well. Now, the execution, thoughtful execution, is really quite broad. You could break it down to a lot of more steps, but it's really about taking our existing data, putting it into a system, an enterprise performance management system typically, that brings it all together. You've heard data warehouses, data marts. Yes, all of those things apply too. But the theme today is really around successful planning. So for this hospitality organization, we distilled the data. We had profit and loss, balance sheet, cash flow, and a lot more operational detail for those hotels. So we had a lot of calculations and revenue by room, hotel, restaurants and bars, cleaning, all of those sorts of things were captured in the system. So very quickly we were able to report, and with one button click, get into the system, obviously, once you've logged in, and pick your report, one button click to drill into the detail. So we were bringing a lot of nice information through, and then the very next question, like immediately as soon as we showed the CFO and team, how do I plan against this data? And I just want one button click. So again, that executive buy-in in every meeting where they came along, the theme of that clear vision, and then that moved into the thoughtful execution. So what we did was we said to the organisation, what's the best way to plan? How do you want to do this? And the CFO said, I want a rolling forecast, which is just the best thing to ever hear for a person like me who implements budgeting and forecasting applications around the world, is a rolling forecast. And I'll explain why in a moment. I want my 3-month budget process to become 2 weeks, which is just ridiculous. But when you've got over 1,000 people contributing to a budget, that's a very, very, very expensive process. And if you're only doing your budget once a year, you're not really good at planning because you're not doing it as regularly as, say, riding a bike. You get on a bike, you do it every day, you get very, very good at it. We're not riding our bike every day if we're budgeting once a year. So thoughtful execution saw a number of things. One, it saw getting the data coming together quite nicely. 2, making it really easy for people to use the system. 3, constantly planning ahead. And that saw a few things. So we created an 18-month rolling forecast. We made it as easy as we could. Now, for a hotel, you book a room, right? Get online, you say, I want to stay at this hotel in this room. That's called an occupancy. So we use the occupancy percentage, and there could be hundreds of rooms in a hotel, to drive all of our revenue and all of our costs in our P&L. So we could determine, just by letting people enter one number, which is as close to one button as we could get, occupancy for a given period, typically over a week. We could do it by day if we wanted, but certainly over a week with an 18-month forecast every time we reforecast. From the budget administrator's point of view, they hit one button to create a new forecast for people to enter data if they choose to. So over time, we had 2 execution processes. One was the implementation, and 2 was the actual rolling out and people touching the data and executing what they had to do, which was enter their forecasts. And it started out pretty rough. Not everyone contributed. But this is where we go back to point 1, the executive level buy-in kind of forced people. Hey, CEO noticed you hadn't updated your forecast. Is everything okay? Are you happy with it? Because you kind of missed by a big percentage. Oh, okay, I better do that. Just a gentle tap in the right direction. And we saw a lot of buy-in from key individuals. We started picking key individuals as well. Think of it as those first penguins who jump off the iceberg. You see all the others follow. So we also picked the right penguins to bring people along too. But once people started getting used to, and again, hundreds and hundreds of people were part of this rolling forecast, their accuracy got extremely good. Now, this process took about 18 months to really solidify in the business. And again, that's part of thoughtful execution. This is not an overnight process. We have employees come and go. But at the same time, we're building a new part of our corporate culture, which is we're always looking ahead, and we're looking ahead aggressively. And we're making sure that potentially daily, we're reviewing whether our forecast was right or not. And it's not about getting just our forecast right. It's about saying, well, my forecast says this. How do I get better? How do I improve this? Or how do I reduce those costs? And that inevitably led to those goals, 20+% growth year on year over a 3-year period. And then most people were contributing if they were around, and it was as simple as tweaking an occupancy percentage or another percentage here, or they could get into detail. And the budget process took 2 weeks. Significant cost savings, significant revenue increases. And that is the best process I've ever seen.
Yeah. That's a great story. And I love your analogies you gave about the penguin and also looking forward as opposed to looking backward. But how do you really foster that culture change in terms of the way people have traditionally done it? So they've been traditionally in Excel spreadsheets and, silos and not sharing data, and the collaborative process you're talking about is worlds away from that. So give me an idea about that.
I'm glad you said worlds away, because you remind me of a university customer of mine. And the headline I give this customer is Star Wars. Why Star Wars? It's kind of weird. We had exactly that problem. We had a new budget system and people cross-functionally. So in those different areas, they just didn't buy in. They just didn't want to do it. Universities can be a little trickier because you've got department heads that are educators. They're not budget experts. They've got their Excel spreadsheets they've been using. They're used to copying and pasting. They're used to using whatever some of them were literally pieces of paper they'd hand to their staff to then enter into a spreadsheet, who would then send that to the accounting department. So Star Wars is an interesting case because this university, they used a name and shame, and that didn't go well. Again, they had hundreds of people who were supposed to be contributing to the plan, to the budget, and they didn't. It was a 3-round budget. Round 1 saw about 10% contribution. People just didn't even enter their spreadsheets. They just did nothing. They just didn't want to play. Significant change management problem. Yes, people were trained. Yes, they knew about it. They had better things to do. So what this university did was send an email to everyone and said, all of these people didn't contribute. You're very naughty. Next time you're better. And that was the worst thing they could do. And it was a bit of a catch-22 for people because you've got the fact that, hey, you didn't do what you were meant to do. So you did the wrong thing. But at the same time, now everyone knows you did the wrong thing. It was a bit of an HR problem. So they flipped it on its head and they said, look, for round 2, we're sorry, we're not going to name and shame, but instead what we've got is some prizes. And here are the categories for the prizes. And we're not going to tell you what the prizes were. I think you can probably guess based on the name of the topic why I call it Star Wars. But they had some categories like the all-nighter. Now, with our systems, we're able to monitor when people are entering data. So we created this category called the all-nighter. So there were some people who literally logged on at 5 p.m. the day before the budget was due at 5 p.m. So they had a 24-hour window. They were literally doing their budget around the clock. The slow and steady, so the tortoise, or the tortoise, I think it was, and other categories like that. And when people won throughout that process, maybe there was the Fast and the Furious, I think was another one, so someone who completed their budget well on time, they started handing out these Star Wars figurines. They took photos, handing it out, a handshake, gave it across and sent that to everyone. And that saw 90+% participation rate just by doing that. So you need to think carefully about the corporate culture within the organisation. Carrots are better than sticks, and advertise it. Make it fun. Make it interesting. It was gamifying, I guess, a little bit there as well. But everyone wanted to be a part of this fun thing. People were talking about it over coffee. Hey, did you see Michael won a R2-D2? Oh, I would have loved that. It was a really interesting process.
I love how you weave in the importance of the people part, because I feel like a lot of times technology, geeky people like us feel like technology is the ultimate solution, but it really doesn't do anything without the people and their buy-in. And so that's what you're really talking about. Give me a little bit of your thought about defining business measures like FTEs. Everyone talks about data accuracy, right? So data accuracy we know is important, but I think in today's world, as the technology is accelerating and it's getting better and companies are getting real-time or near real-time data, it's even more important, the accuracy part, right? Because you can make bad decisions quickly as opposed to make them slowly. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's a good point. You touched on a few things there. One is truth. Is this data truthful? And the other is the definition of this piece of data, this measure. FTE is an interesting one. I've seen it defined as 1. So you and I would be 1 FTE at an organisation. I've seen it defined as 0.9. We take a little over 0.9, I suppose, particularly in the service industries like time and materials, You think your accounting companies, things like that. It's not unusual to see 0.9 as an FTE because we calculate revenue based on an FTE. If someone never got sick, never did any training, and didn't take any PTO, any vacation time or holiday time, they would be a 1 FTE. They'd be fully chargeable, maybe, if utilization was 100%. And the costing would really 100% match up to the expected revenue. But what service organizations do is they'll take out, depending on how they want to calculate, and say, all right, me as a consultant, I would be 0.9 of an FTE, assuming I take sick leave, vacation time, and do training. And that's confusing, particularly for someone who's not in that industry or coming in from a different organization. So it's really important that we have a clear set of definitions of what that data is. I like to have it on a one-pager that has a number, maybe it's a year-to-date number, for FTE as an example there as well. Revenue, sometimes revenue can be a complicated beast, but have a number with a description. And then the truth bit is the ability to drill down into the detail. And that could be done in a couple of ways. I've seen it very successful. I've been in meetings, some really interesting meetings, where person A said, no, that's not right. Person B, who has the same data that person A has, they've just tweaked it a little bit. That's because we've siloed our data. And siloing data can happen in different data warehouses, different data marts, Power BIs, things like that, as well as spreadsheets. But if we can distill that data into that central location that everyone is told and knows is truth, your spreadsheet, I kind of don't care because I can drill down to transactions. And when you can do that, say at a consolidation point, drill down if it's revenue, for instance, drill down and have it broken out by your departments and cost centers and maybe different accounts. Drill down into maybe all of the orders and invoices that make up that revenue. You've got absolute truth. There is no arguing that that spreadsheet's correct when my data source that we're all should be using as a single point is absolutely right because I can prove it because I've got the detail. So having those sorts of things in place make a huge difference.
Absolutely. Excellent. Thank you for that. So, Warwick, you worked with all types of organizations, right? Big or small. And so what are some of the common pitfalls that you've observed in collaborative budgeting? And what are some key recommendations that you can give to other businesses looking to do or improve these types of planning processes?
Yeah, that's a good one. The thing that pops to mind is complication. Don't overcomplicate. It's interesting. Smaller companies can overcomplicate their planning process. So think $5 million revenue organizations, sometimes less, sometimes more, but that ballpark. They have a business that's quite singular. Typically, they do one thing. It might be farming and selling sod, for instance. So it's really easy to model a yard or a meter of sod. And model, what I mean is we can figure out how much that is going to cost to sell, therefore how much we should sell it for, therefore what the margin is. And that's really, really good. But it can be quite complicated. It can be huge spreadsheets that we want to try and translate into some sort of EPM tool, for instance. Larger companies can do the same, but they tend not to. They tend to kind of round up. So instead of a yard or a meter of sod of grass that we cut and we sell and we might buy at your local hardware store, they think more about the whole field or an entire location. And that is an easier process and arguably not as accurate, but accurate enough based on the return on investment of creating that. So you really got to think hard about how complex am I making this? Because the other thing that complexity can create is an inability to compare to your actuals. So do I actually measure how much this small piece of grass is? Or am I more interested in how much it costs to run this actual farm? Because I've got my equipment, I've got people, it's just easier to manage at that higher level. And as long as that farm is making money, or that those fields that those people are managing, if you were to silo them into departments, then sometimes that makes a lot more sense even for the smaller organizations. And why is complexity a problem? It takes a long, long time to create, to validate, to enter the data, and to manage, tweak and modify and stuff. So you end up getting resources stuck on on that and not really focusing on proper business change. What are some projects that I should be engaged in to really drive greater revenue? That's a big ticket item for me.
And you touched on complexity. So now we want to talk about a different type of complexity. Things like artificial intelligence and other types of emerging tech, right? So we're adding more types of complexity. So how do you see collaborative planning evolving in the future? So what are some of the opportunities and challenges that businesses may face, especially as they look at, these more advanced technologies?
Yeah, it's really interesting times. We're seeing those large language models doing some really cool stuff. We're embedding them in our technology today, and I'm lucky to play with those new toys and be a part of that process. Other things that are really interesting, your quantum compute. I know it's very early days there, but if you couple AI and quantum computing, we've got some really cool stuff coming. But parking the quantum computing, because it's super bleeding edge right now, artificial intelligence offers us a few things, and really some interesting basic things like skilling people quickly, because you can ask the machine, I'm in my planning system or reporting system, can you create a report, or is there a report, literally write this, can you create or is there a report that shows my departments across time and, FTEs, what's my average historical FTE rate for these departments? And it'll give it to you in words, and you could say, look, can you create me a report? And it'll create a report for you. Can you change the colors? Can you do this? Can you do that? So it's like you and I talking, and you're asking me to do things that I'm literally doing it as we go. So that's a huge learning curve helper, huge time saver as well. So we're seeing some cool stuff like that. And that's already launched in some of our products today. And we're seeing it across the landscape as well. The other thing that is really interesting, though, I think it is very useful, is forecasting and automated forecast. And you might hear machine learning and machine learning or auto ML, where we have parts of our data like revenue, if we're a hotel, occupancy estimates for the future being created on a daily or more often basis. And it gives us another line on our forecast chart that says, if we don't do anything new, if we don't do anything special, this is what our revenue is going to look like for the next 3 to 12 months. And it's not 100% accurate, but arguably 95% accuracy is what you're looking for with that machine learning, that automated AI for your forecasts. Sometimes 85% accuracy is better than what humans are doing today. So, think the weather. There are all these different models. They're all artificial intelligence, kind of. Some of them are strict calculations, but they all have different outcomes. And we can do the same with artificial intelligence. And I think of it more as a guide for people. I think of it as kind of that employee who's just 100% focused on what they're doing, which is maybe forecasting that revenue. There's no promotion going for them. There's no political gain by tweaking the numbers or having weird conversations that might distract people from just focusing on the future. One of the tricky things, though, has been bringing that to people. So if you think about the iPhone and your Android phones these days, there's a lot of sophisticated stuff. It's made very, very simple on the surface, so you don't have to be a computer expert at all to make that thing fly. The same thing's happening now in our industry with AI. There's some really sophisticated stuff under the surface that people can do today. It's quite programmatic. So we're giving them a beautiful interface. One of our products I saw last week, literally you've got a chunk of data, you hit one button and you get your deep dive analytics in a paragraph or two that you can copy and paste into PowerPoint or an email, or just leave on the page as text for the next reader to come along and see. So there's some really powerful stuff coming. But I don't see it as a job problem just yet. Maybe when quantum compute comes, but we'll see.
I agree with that. So if you had to leave the listeners with one key takeaway in 60 seconds, what would it be?
I would remember those 3 ingredients. I know it's 3 and not 1, but it's one theme. Remember your ingredients. Executive led. If you don't have buy-in, I've had a small number of customers where there was no one leading it and it failed. It seemed like a good idea. we'll let those guys do it. It didn't happen. Executives need to run this, whether it's divisional or enterprise-wide. Must be executive-led. A clear, simple vision and a tagline that goes with it that matches your corporate culture, the one button click, the example that I used before, or Star Wars. And then thoughtful execution. Let's be realistic. What are we trying to do? Are we trying to boil the ocean here, or should we make bite-sized chunks? Because we want buy-in. We inevitably want, in a year or two's time, to be here. How do we get there in an effective way? And make sure you include your folk, your team members, across those different departments and divisions within your organization. Otherwise, you just won't get their buy-in and it'll be a battle.
Well, this is golden. This is golden sage advice. I really enjoy talking with you, and this is tremendous. So thank you so much. And so I hope the listeners took away as much from the podcast as I did today. And for further information on what we talked about today and to learn more, go over to insightsoftware.com. So we'll be back next week with another episode of the podcast series. This is the first in the series. Until then, make sure you subscribe to the podcast on all major platforms and follow the conversation on our socials at EM360Tech on X and LinkedIn. And for more great daily content, head over to em360tech.com. Thank you.